All right. Well, welcome to another edition of New Wine Uncorked. And if you're with us today, we are totally appreciative of it. And we're stoked that you're joining us. It's been a couple of weeks because you know how life is.
All
And
right. Welcome to another edition of New
that's
Wine Uncorked.
my
With us
computer
today,
going
we
off
are
with
totally
wonderful.
appreciative of it, and
Hold on,
we're
let me just
stoked
turn
that
this
you're joining
down.
us. It's been a couple of
The
weeks because
sound
life
here.
is
Okay,
and,
here we
welcome
go.
to another edition of New
All right, my bad. All right, sorry. Technical difficulties with running YouTube, and Zoom. Also, it's all good though. So, and this is we're talking about today the continuation of what we've been talking about over the weeks and stuff, and what New Wineskins is about: the engagement of culture through Trinitarian lens, which means it's relational. So it's in Christ through the Spirit, so that we participate with God. And he then uses us wherever we're at, that each one of us has a specific role to play. God created us in his image, so to then be his love for the sake of the world. And we want to continue this discussion. My brother's here joining me once again, Phil and Jim. And we have the ability because of technology. So technology is one of these things where in some sense, it flattens out the world, because we all have the ability to connect in different places. In fact, the three of us are in three different locations, and yet look, we can be in one place, and we're coming to you live on YouTube wherever you're at in whatever time zone is. So that's a neat thing. That's a cool thing, relational opportunities that we haven't had in the past. However, what does technology do to possibly speed things up that might then run into disasters? And so we want to continue this. I was reading this article. Guys, we talked prior to this, so this is a little bit of a tangent about what does it mean to live faith. In thinking this is what Jim and Phil and I were talking about before, and I didn't pose this question, so this is brand new to them. It's brand new to you, our viewing audience. But what about technology? In I think it was, I can't remember the article, 70 years ago, 60 years ago, a gentleman said that looking forward to the advancements of technology, because what technology will do will allow for us to maybe work only 3 days a week, a total of 15 to 20 hours that week, because technology is going to make life easier. It's going to make life where we have more time for leisure. Well, look at the experiment of technology, and the article then went on to say, actually, technology has done almost opposite. It has made this networking possible, but it's made us more busy. And I bring this up because our conversation prior to us starting the recording for YouTube was about the truth of living faith. And that's the title of today's episode. But what does that look like? Living faith meaning what? So we have an active faith, but then also living faith. You live it out by becoming something or living out the truth of our creation. So what does that look like in today's culture? We have technology bringing us all together so that we can experience life together. But in doing so, then we see the humans' interaction in life. Over the weekend, July 4th, a lot of people in America had the ability to celebrate independence and being with friends. But then there was families in the Chicagoland area that were devastated with the July 4th shooting. And then overseas, we see turmoil with England and resignation of a prime minister. And then just this morning, I was reading an assassination of a former Japanese prime minister. And so technology then allows us to see the expanse of what's going on around us, but also technology brings the ability for us to destroy one another. So we were talking, and I'd like to continue this discussion. What does it mean living faith in today's culture? How do we live out faith? And what does living faith and active living faith look like in the midst of the goodness of being able to network over, many of us have FaceTimed or Zoomed with family members that we weren't able to see on long distance calls. So that's an awesome part. But what about then the technology that then allows for us to be destructive and towards one another, because we can take out lives with the pull of a trigger, as well as, destroy one another because of texting and things like this with illicit relationships with some of the stuff that they were talking about in England. So how does living faith look in the 21st century? Does it? Like, what is the role of the church today? Is it different? Is it the same? How do we live out our Christianity?
Yeah. Yeah, Matt, I was just thinking, actually your last point was kind of one of the things I was thinking. All this information is available to us through technology. So we're aware of what happened in Japan. We're aware of what's happening over in London. We're aware of the things that's happening, the shootings that happened on 4th of July. We're aware of police shooting of another unarmed individual the same week. And all these different things happening simultaneously. And then also tragedy in our lives. So the idea that technology is making our lives more convenient, it is in some regard, but it's making our lives different because we're now aware of all these things and we carry the weight of all these things as we do the stuff we typically do. And we have to learn new skills and how to, figure out what Zoom is and YouTube and all these things at the same time. And it's like we have to learn new things. We have weight of new things. So life is really just different. It's not necessarily even more or less busy. It's just we got to learn different things and we have a different weight that we're carrying as we go to different things. But the role of the church in this is to remain innovative, to remain to try to be innovative, I should say. I mean, yeah, I don't know if anyone would call the church always innovative, but just how do you stay innovative here? And using this space and not seeing it as something wicked, but seeing it as something that we can connect with people better, seeing it as something that we can use to do ministry differently. Um, but just all these kind of things, we can use these things as tools to help us as we do things, because we know that there's greater need. We know there's people that need just the things that the church offers, whether it be prayer, whether it be grounding, whether it's just understanding, where the Lord is in the middle of all this. But just
Mm-hmm.
the church being able to use these resources to communicate that gospel truth in the middle of all the stuff that's going on, because we know people are hurting. We know that people are carrying additional weight. So let's use the vehicles that we have to share the love of the gospel, share the love of Christ to people in the middle of all this.
Jim, what about the innovation? Do you think, because I totally appreciate that. The innovation, has the church been innovative? And the weird thing is yes, but then also no, right? Like, doesn't the church, like I find also, even with my, my faith, I feel like it gets in ruts sometimes, which I don't know if that makes sense, but where you're going and you might be participating in things, what the church is doing, but there's not an intentional focus on spiritual growth. I get so caught up in just doing, you know what I'm saying? Where I'm just acting and I'm not even intentionally focusing on, well, where is this putting me with my relationship with Christ? And so the innovation that I think I might be having could be skewed in the sense that if I'm not connected with the Spirit, Christ through the Spirit, I might think I'm being creative and all I'm doing is creating further turmoil. So over the years, the innovation, it is interesting, the creativity. I talk about this a little bit in my book with the imagination of the church and stuff and creativity. How has, I don't know, maybe you guys have a view of it, but has the human become more or less creative? I think, unfortunately, when I look at the human and in the innovation of the human, not the church, I find that we've, in some sense, become more creative in being mean to each other. Like we are innovative in our ways to, pull one another down. So innovate, that it's an interesting pathway that you brought us into, Bill, which I think is because it goes into that individual, but then it also goes into the communal. The church doesn't want to create individualism. It's hopefully helping to promote individuals who then participate in the community, because they are individuals based on the community. The community is based on the individual. But I feel like the innovation sometimes of the church is, how do we become so individualized that we almost, in a sense, negate the community that Christ wants us to be innovative within?
Yeah, you bring up a great question. We talk about Trinitarian, right? The Trinitarian lens is really the relational lens from which we look. And so we look at the relationship between Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And so, but can we have those type of relationships, or can we have community on Zoom, right? Some people would say that's innovative. Well, sure, but it's a stopgap. And so for me, one of the challenges is, and one of the challenges the churches are facing right now is that technology has isolated us. I mean, people don't have to gather. It becomes a convenience of, hey, I think I'll just sit at home because you know what? I mean, Zoom, I only had to get half dressed. I mean, it was only like I could wear my shorts, but then I would, put on a nice shirt and at least comb my hair, and and so I didn't need to put on my shoes or socks. I mean, I could just, and the convenience of just kind of opening up my laptop half an hour before a church service starts. I mean, that was pretty cool, right? But that does that develop community? I mean, is that what the church is about? And so even as a pastor, I mean, that was convenient for me because, I didn't have to drive to church, and also, I help with the worship team. So I didn't have to drive to church. I didn't have to set things up. I didn't have to tear things down. I mean, I could just half hour before and half hour after, and that was it. And so, but there's that convenience, but I think our society is that has become the convenience, right? And so is that enough? So one of the things that we're trying to think about as far as being innovative is how do we develop community? I mean, how do we bring people back? And that's kind of weird to think, oh yeah, being innovative about gathering people. And so, how do we bring people back to church? Because I think that technology is a stopgap. I think there's some great things that technology does, but the relational aspect of being together, being with one another, that's what we were wired for, right? I mean, that's what we were created for. And so, so I think that's the challenge right now. I mean, how can we be innovative? And what we're trying to battle against is technology. So
yeah, and not make it and you're right though, Jim, not make it a battle, right? Like, how do things have that relational aspect to it where they advance one another, where they support one another and things like that. And so and I'm wondering though, if sometimes the innovation of the church goes against that, maybe, I don't know, like this is the seeing of the other, like trying to understand where the other comes into my own growth as a person, as opposed to someone to be exploited and used for my benefit, which is, and I'm not saying that that's what the American culture is founded on, this exploitation of the other, because, in a republic, the idea is that we actually have people who represent our own interest, right? And so it's set up to be communal. I'm wondering, with the advancements of technology, the market, because there is a lot of talk. We're back down in California visiting family, and here they just had like an automatic 3-cent hike on gas, because to make up for some of the help that the government's doing, the state government's doing for a culture today. So what's the point with that? And yeah, do you guys see that? And passing this is the liveness of YouTube. That was my dad. And so in order to talk during a live recording, you got to pass notes. So the teacher's like, hey, Farlow, is that a note or what? So yes, I was just handed a note by Mr. Farlow. So it's all good though, right? Hey, but this is the beauty of networking, fact, right? Because of technology, we have been able to come back down here to spend time, not just with my folks, but with my daughter, who, she's not on here now because she had her own kid. And so technology, those are the positives, but it's also this technology that makes this stuff going on in Ukraine still horrendous. And like you said, Phil, there was another shooting. There was a verdict that came down this weekend also from the George Floyd and Derek Chauvin, where, and he got prison for not adhering to his civil rights, and so technology allows for us to even step in, like, no play on words, knee on each other's, kneel down and crush each other's freedom. So where is the church in our innovations? This is what I'm trying to learn with others. How do I creatively learn to communicate in truth? Because I think when people hear creativity and imagination, they hear fantasy and falsehoods, right? When we're creative with the truth. When we're imaginative with the truth, it's like we have this idea to stretch it, right? And so it's like, we don't want to do that. What we want to do, and this is again, when I'm trying to flesh out with some, some of the classes that I'm going to be teaching in the fall and stuff, is what does innovation in loving the other look like? How far can we stretch that to where we're still true to the God that we believe in and that we've committed our lives to, that died on the cross for us? That seems innovative. That seems like an innovative way to love, to say, I'm going to let you thrash my body, crush me. And this is how I'm going to show you how to overcome hate and violence, is to go through hate and violence and to become the hated one. So that seems innovative, but how is then the church to fulfill that innovation, that creativity, to reimagine what it means to not just to love you, but to become love for you? Is that even possible?
And I'm sure, and it is possible. Thinking of just the innovation and the amount of things that's out. You asked earlier about us being creative, and I think it's easy to say that we're not as creative. Look at the movies that are out there, is retelling old stories and redoing old movies and all those kind of things. But there's also, there's more information, but the top end of innovation and creativity is probably some of the greatest we've ever seen. I mean, if you've watched Ted Lasso, that's phenomenal, right? The bottom end of recreating and just generic information that's out there. Some of the stuff, I mean, I would say a particular news network that's recycling stuff and not telling the truth, the bottom end of it. But again, the question becomes, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to have like manicured? I mean, think about it. We're on Zoom. My background isn't real right now, right? You can have a curated life, or you can have an authentic life, like Jim sitting in his car. I mean,
That's right.
he could be sitting at the Eiffel Tower because he could have a background that says the Eiffel Tower behind him. But instead, he's in his car and I'm in a fake background. So, what do we do with what we have, with the resources that we have? And that becomes the question. Are we going to be more authentic? Are we going to be less authentic? Is it going to be more curated? Is it going to be, that's going to be part of the question. I know one of the questions I was wrestling with over the term with school is, should churches have like a 24/7 kind of online presence that people can always go into, always check out, stuff like that? Funny thing, right? I imagine 15, 20 years ago, there was someone saying churches need to have some type of online doorstep that people can go to 20 years ago. And I remember trying to get a church to do our staff meetings over Zoom or over conference call once a week, so we wouldn't have to come from different parts of the city to meet up. And they were like, nah, we need to meet up in person. Well, COVID happens. No one's meeting in person to do anything. So that becomes the thing. What are we going to do with the stuff that we have? People were thinking this years ago, but now it's here. So now the intentional question of, how do you can you create community virtually? Will it be beneficial? Will it be beneficial to your sick and shut-in people? Can you set up a system where your people who can't get together, you can actually meet up with them? Can you set up a more convenient system, but you still have to be more intentional about the questions that you ask and how the conversation goes when you get online? So all these kind of things are things, but it kind of changes the questions that we're asked, the intentionality behind it. How authentic are we going to be? All those kind of things are going to be stuff we have to talk about. Are we going to make something that's curated and fake, or are we going to be in Jim's car? I mean, these are the questions that we have to wrestle with.
Yeah. Authenticity, right? Authenticity is the key. And I think that's huge as far as where we're at as a church. What is the authentic church? What does the authentic church look like? Who is she in the 21st century? And I mean, it's interesting too that we've just gone through this period and we're still in this period, mask or no mask, and some of the stuff, the work that I've done with imagination, with creativity, I talk about wearing masks, inauthentic. We put on masks, and it's just so weird because even today, even with the masks, when you go travel, they want to see you authentically. And so we are standing behind someone, a woman who was in full garb for her religious garb, and even with going through TSA and still wanting to respect her religious beliefs. So they took her to a private bin thing so she could remove her facial from the head garb. And so, but they still respect her, but they still needed to see her authenticity, her face, right? She could not be masked. And same thing with if you're wearing a mask for, for COVID purposes, even going through TSA, please remove your mask so I can see your face. So there's still something about us needing the authenticity of our own personhood, right? The question is, and Phil, you bring that up, like, what does it mean to be authentic? Is Jim sitting in his car any more authentic than you with a backdrop? Or is the authenticity fabricated, or maybe it's jammed in there that Jim is trying to seem way more real, so he's going to have, like, is it more real? Where is it inauthentic if my dad walks in and videoing you with you guys to not acknowledge him, and everyone sees him walk in, and then we see kind of fumbling around, what I'm doing, I'm trying to still engage here, getting stuff here, right? Is the authenticity just to go, okay, hold on, folks, let me just talk to my dad right here, right? Like, and so I feel like that's what that's what I wrestle with in a situation where I am the only follower of Christ, and they're discussing stuff where I'm like, I don't believe in this principle of whether it's like, let's say I'm not pro death penalty. Okay. Let's say we're in a group with pro death penalty people. Is that the time where I stand up and say, hey, I just want to, throw this out there. I want to, and especially if I know folks that are Christians, do I challenge them, or in challenging their view or asking questions? Is that a challenge to where people are like, that's not love? And so we start to get, well, what is authentic response of my faith to the people in front of me, to this situation? How do I respond to this shooting when I am a 4.5 hour flight away? Like, and to be real, but not to be inauthentic. I was sad, to be honest, when I heard this story, but I didn't go and weep. I didn't cry because I didn't know any of the folks that were killed during the July 4th parade. But my heart was sad. But what's the authentic sadness to where then the church steps in and goes, okay, we don't need to know the people to love them, because we still know them in a sense of they're human, just like me. I know what they need. They need to be loved. They need people. But I also don't want to be too much. You know what I'm saying? Like as if me, Matt Farlow, here right now in Northern California, if I go out and do this one act or this act, that I'm going to change the world. I am changing the world, but authentically, I have to be honest with myself. And so I appreciate that. Like, Phil, like, yeah, what is the authentic? Who is the authentic me?
Yeah.
And how do I figure him out? Like,
and for all of us, we're all discovering more and more. And as we get older and as we take on different career paths or whatever, who we are changes. We discover more of who we are is probably a better way of saying it. I mean, you're going to be, Matt, you moved from California where you were in a classroom there, and you're going to be in a classroom in Portland, Oregon. Those are two distinct classrooms. It may feel like students are students, but in Portland versus where you were in California, it's going to be a very different conversation.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to do, being an academic, because you're in a college and grad school environment. Yes. But they're asking you to do pastoral work amongst these students. That's a very different space than if you're just, professor that just came with your tweed jacket and this is getting big circles and say a bunch of big words. It's different. So it's gonna be, what do we do with these things? I'd be remiss also to think think of one of the stories we haven't mentioned. We got a WNBA player that got arrested,
Griner, yeah,
and just pled guilty to some of the charges. These stories that we maybe didn't care about 20 years ago because we didn't know they were there, and now we know, And so now we have to care. I'm thinking also on 4th of July. Yeah, we had a shooting in the morning and a shooting in the evening. That was a tough day. It was tough for me to go into work the next day because yeah, so much stuff going on. So it's like, what do we do with this? And the church has to be here for people as they're going through stuff, because that's not even talking about what's happening in my life. And so I think the point I wanted to make is that what's too much? Life is just messy in general. So once you get to know people, once you get to actually be in people's life, you realize, all of us have heavy stuff that we're carrying. All of us have heavy stuff that we're dealing with, And so that becomes the thing. It's like, if this is reality, if this is my life, then yeah, this is what's authentic. If you ask me how I'm doing and I start giving you a list, that's life. That's life. That's what it is. And I think the more and more we're getting in people's lives, the more and more we're going to see, yeah, man, we all have messy lives, and we can choose not to share it. And we can choose not to allow the love of God through the presence of our brothers and sisters in Christ help us in the middle of this, carry us, bear burdens with us. We can choose not to do that. But we've done that for years, man, and it proved to be inauthentic. So then when we had the opportunity to have to disconnect a little bit, did we become more fake or more real? Did we become authentic, or did we become more plastic? Did we wear more masks?
Yeah.
Essentially connected to your idea. That becomes the question. So
Yeah.
I invite us to be authentic, to share. And even if it's heavy, we're all dealing with heavy stuff. And if you're not dealing with heavy stuff right now, just live a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this whole term authentic is because I think, part of the, and it started when whoever brought up about, oh yeah, we can do like maybe Phil, you talked about doing the background and all that. I think that, one of the things about authenticity is I think what makes electronic stuff helpful for people is because I get to let people know what I define as authentic, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we get to say, this is what authenticity, and then I was thinking about the word innovative, right? I mean, we have innovators, but also, I mean, it's amazing how the internet and all this stuff is affected by influencers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and this whole the whole influencer thing, I mean, it is one of the things I follow on Instagram is called influencers in the wild. So it's like these videos of people taking videos of influencers, kind of like setting up their scene, setting up their things, setting everything up, and that people look at them and they just think, oh man, look what this person's doing. And for some people, they probably think, oh yeah, this person's just being authentic, but no, they're setting up a scene to be able to impose or to at least to show. And so I think part of the challenge of being authentic is, are we authentic, right? I mean, are we really who we are, or are we afraid to be authentic? Because again, it's just that fear. Are people going to accept me or, reject me? And so I think that's, addressing the authentic. And so are we being authentic with ourselves? Are we being, is there an integrity to our character, or are we just, because I remember when back in the days when you had dial up, they had chat rooms, right? And people love to go in chat rooms because, you can kind of like be somebody else. I mean, that was kind of the big deal. You didn't have to be you. You could be, you can be somebody else on this chat room. And I think it's just, it's kind of grown in that way that people can be what they want, what they want the world to see. And so I think that, so are we willing to let people be authentic? And again, I think that's when you come into community. This whole idea, I just think is so important. There, to be able to take college classes online and all those things, those are cool. I mean, those are convenient, but there's something about, I don't type fast, right? And so for me, when people are having these discussions online, when I was taking classes, I'm just like, I'm still addressing the first question and they're like on the fifth question already, right? And it's like, oh, delete that, oh, here, I'm going to go for the fifth question. Sorry to answer that one. And they're like in the 10th, so because we are created so uniquely and in so different ways, again, I think it's just that getting back together. The other thing too, you bring up an interesting point because, the television, or what we see coming at us so quickly, all these, issues and concerns and disasters and all things, they come at us so quickly. I think we sometimes become numb to that. I mean, it's just kind of like, oh, great, another one, right? Oh, it's another. But I think, Phil brought up an interesting point because for me, and again, it gets back to this relational piece, right? And it's not only just relational piece, but the importance of having different people that aren't like us, having neighbors, people of color, people of different religious backgrounds. And that's really the good thing about New Wine, is because they're trying to develop and nurture those kind of conversations. But like, Phil, when you said, I was upset when I saw the shooting, it upset me so much to where I had a hard time at work, Well, I'm curious. I mean, Phil, what was it? I mean, and you don't have to answer that. This is just kind of more rhetorical, but it's like, what is it that upset Phil? Right. And I think in those relationships that we have with one another, especially with people with different backgrounds and people life experiences, when we start to hear and understand, when we start to hear what's bothering them, I think it helps us, it helps inform me to maybe how I can help, help the other. And it helps inform me, like, like when Phil says, man, that just rattled me. I mean, it helps inform me how, what, sometimes we need to take care of the people beside us. Sometimes we need to help, I mean, I know that there's a lot of people that, whenever there's like this, like shootings or anything like that, especially, here's what really, I mean, and I don't know if I would have gotten this unless I heard about it. It's again, oops. Okay, wait, hold on. There we go.
Authenticity,
losing my grip. But here's the deal. When that shooting happened, what came to my mind, it's like, another white shooter taken into custody.
Mm.
Right? I mean, the dude got in a car and he tried to get away from the police.
Yeah.
I mean, and so when you start, and so, I wouldn't have necessarily thought of that until, because of my relationships with, people of color and being able to see those things, I mean, so for me, whenever shooting happens like this, mass shootings, and I know there's something about when you take somebody into custody, right? It's like, who are they taking into custody? Who are they leaving dead in the streets? I mean, so I think having those relationships, because I don't think I could have figured that out on my own as a native Hawaiian. I mean, I don't really think I would see that, right? And so I think that in knowing that and understanding one another, when people of color get upset and get mad, whatever color, at least I think it's, instead of like, oh great, another angry Asian, to know why they're upset, right? I mean, it's kind of like, hey, it's just an old guy. Well, in our culture, elders are highly respected. And so when you like pounce and beat the crap out of an elderly person, out of a kupuna, that's not good. And that's, so like when I got into the conversation with a lot of the Asian Americans pastors, that would always rise. It's always about, it's not necessarily, hey, look at this attack on Asians, but the first thing that's spoken of is like, they can't dishonor our kapunas like this, right? And so once we start to understand one another, I think then we can grieve together. And so I think those are, and I think it's that kind of authenticity. I think it's being able to, because there's certain things where there's certain stories I won't share with other people because they're going to take it wrong, or but it takes relationships to finally. I mean, we've learned that it's the relationships where you'll say, hey, you know what? Let me just share this. And they're like, whoa, really? Instead of like, no, you just misunderstood the whole situation. And so I think part of it too, maybe the authenticity is being in a community of people where we can feel like, hey, I can be authentic around these people. And I mean, it just kind of like nurtures, it feeds off one another. When we can be authentic, then it allows other people to be authentic. And then maybe that's what the church is about, isn't it? I mean, if we're going to be a church that's authentic, we're going to need to be able to hear people's stories and say, you know what? I hear what you're saying. And so that Phil's story or Matt, your story or anybody's story, it really does, it will affect us. It will change us. It will transform us. I think it will inform us of how we can better. I mean, it might be just taking a call and saying, taking the time and saying, hey, Phil, how are you doing in the midst of this shooting? or somebody that we know that, we have a friend that they were shot because their son had some mental issues. And so when somebody's shot because of mental disabilities or mental health, to be able to say, hey, I just saw this shooting on TV. Are you doing okay? Because I know you went, it's calling people, and just even that's, I think, the way the church can help is to be reminded of those around us that is affected by those kind of things.
Yeah, dude, that's brilliant. And that's where we want to continue to go next week, continue to talk about that. What does that look like? What does it look like to step in, for us to be our authentic selves, to be our real selves, and to understand, though, that me being me is in need of Jim, you being you, and Phil being Phil. And for me not to project onto either one of you based on my interactions with folks that I think are like you, and vice versa, right? And that comes when we start to, with our stories, our life stories begin to intersect. A lot of people who drive don't like intersections because they're messy, but exactly what Phil's talking about, right? We need to embrace the messiness to see the beauty. I think when we get more into love being in life being this beautiful mess of love, then we start to go, oh, we don't need Phil's got a beautifully clean background. It's nice. If I show you the background here, you're gonna be like, dang, and say, maybe even if Jim allowed for the camera not to go off as it fell in his car, we would see the authenticness of his, right? And so this is what we want to continue in Christ through the Spirit, so as to not engage for the engagement purpose, but to actually engage to know the person in front of us. So maybe we say, not engagement of culture, new wine skins in Christ through the Spirit for the embracement of culture, just as Christ on the cross, naked, bleeding, last breath, what did he do? He embraced me. He said on there, his thought was, dude, Matt, I love you. And his thought was, Jim, I love you. His thought was, Phil, I am crazy in love with you, right? Like, I love you, dudes. Do you believe it? And so that's what we want to continue to authentically step into. Where am I at with my belief, and who do I trust, right? Who am I willing to follow and to lay down my life for? And so we want to continue this conversation. For those of you that this is the first time on YouTube with New Wine, just go right down there in that bottom corner there. You can either click on the New Wine logo, or go right below and hit subscribe, and then hit that bell right there. That way next week when we come on live for YouTube, you'll be notified, and you just scroll down on your phone, your iPad, your computer, and you could go and join us live on YouTube. For others, if you want to figure out more who New Wineskins is and why we do what we do, go new-wineskins.org, and it'll take you to our website, and it'll explain and give you a further background as to who we are. Why Phil, why myself, why Jim, as we participate not only in the academy and the church, but we're all also participating with New Wine for the embracement of culture, so as to help me be the authentic me, and to help you become the authentic you, because that's what Jesus wants. He wants us to be who we were created to be. So we're stoked that you joined us today, July 8th, this Friday. Have an awesome weekend, and we look forward to seeing you next Friday. Until then, for Phil and for Jim, I'm Matt. This has been another edition of New Wine Uncorked. See you next week. See you on the flip side. Have a good one.